Hello, hope you're doing well. Today I wanted to talk about an issue known as vaping, an issue that has affected a lot of teenagers and young adults and honestly middle schoolers too. Today marks 2 years since I personally quit vaping. Technically, I hit it a handful of times in the following couple months, but those were just drunk stim shots and not actual, 24/7 hand and fist vaping. Vaping doesn't seem to be as popular nowadays as it was in 2018, 2019 when it was presumably at its peak. It's also hard to get accurate numbers though, since not everyone reports that they do it. I will say I have noticed just by walking around my college campus, I hardly see anybody doing it. I'll see a couple guys here and there, especially the frat guys, but other than that, I don't really see many people fiending for it. And maybe because the campus doesn't let it happen, I don't really know, honestly. Some reasons why it may have been down nowadays is that some of the schools, like high schools and middle schools, have really been hammering it into these kids' heads, all the downsides to it. I remember back when I was in school, we didn't really talk about that at all. It was more about cigarettes, and at that point, Juul and all these disposables weren't out then. They were so focused on cigarettes that when vapes came out and they were marketed as a healthier alternative, I think it let a lot of people's guards down, and they just ended up doing that, getting hooked onto nicotine that way. Or another reason, and I mainly found this out through online, is that it's kind of like reverse bullying has helped. Basically making fun of people who suck in flavored air and have kind of turned the whole perspective on vaping into something that was cool, into something that people just kind of make fun of you for. Like it doesn't really look as cool nowadays when you're smoking a vape. It's kind of just like people take pity on you. Could also be the area I'm in. I don't really know how easy or hard it is to sell vapes in Arkansas. Back when I was in New Jersey, every small little Indian-run convenience store would sell all sorts of vapes to anyone, no matter what age they were. They didn't card, and you just walk in there and just buy a vape. There's this one place called Moe's Smoke Shop, and literally every time I went in there were at least 5 different kids buying vapes, myself included. I would make the guess that if they didn't sell to kids and they could only sell to adults, they probably wouldn't even be in business. Since I quit 2 years ago, I'm not really in the weeds as much as I used to be. I used to be in the trenches, finding the latest and greatest vape to use. My favorite was these things called hides, and I would get sour apple ice, and my goodness was it amazing. I can't lie and say that it was an awful experience because it really wasn't, but it certainly started to affect me in other ways that were killing my motivation and health. If you're in the weeds and vape yourself, I would love to hear some on-the-ground details about how it is, because as I'm getting older, I'm finally realizing that I'm basically completely out of touch with anyone under the age of 24. I know like elf bars are popular, and I have a couple buddies who still vape, but for this video, I mainly just want to talk about how I got into vaping, how I quit, and some recommendations for people. And I know it's already 3 minutes into the video, and I'm now just explaining what the video is going to be about, so sorry. So on my dad's side of my family, they have a very long history of smoking cigarettes. My one great uncle had to talk out of his throat because he had cancer and had to get something removed in there. I don't know the full details anymore. But I remember when he would talk to me as a kid, it's always scared the shit out of me. He sounded like RFK Jr. talking, and he had to sound all watery, and he had to hold his hand to his throat, and it was just really nasty. There was like a hole there, and he had like it was nightmare fuel, and ever since then, I never wanted to smoke because I was worried that would happen to me. And besides that, all my life, I was taught to never smoke. I remember when I was younger, when I would smell a cigarette going into like a Walmart or going into a restaurant, and I smelled smoke outside, I vividly remember I would hold my breath until we got out of the range of that or got inside. Like I always thought it was gross when I was growing up, and I told myself I would never smoke a cigarette, I would never do it. And to be fair, I stayed true to myself. I mean, honestly, schools and commercials really did great anti-smoking marketing. Something they didn't take into account was how big vaping was going to become. And before Juul and all the disposables came out and really did the marketing towards kids, vaping, it wasn't really talked about. There were things here and there. Like I remember H3's video about vaping and the Vape Man or whatever it was called. But other than that, it wasn't really seen a lot. And then I don't remember how it happened, but Juul really just took over social media. I don't really know the details behind the history of Juul, or I'm sure there's better videos you can watch if you're really interested in that. I just know they started marketing it on probably like Barstool and all these like big frat accounts for like college parties and everything. And that kind of blew it up and it got really popular. And then nobody had any studies or any reasons to doubt that vaping wasn't better for you because it probably is better than smoking cigarettes, but it still has a lot of downsides. And so I was a senior in high school back at the time in 2018, and that's when people started to get the vapes, and a couple of my friends got it. And honestly, I used to chief them when they would bring them around. And the only reason why I was even smoking it in the first place was because I didn't really care about the health effects. I didn't think it would bother me at all. And at that point, I was smoking some weed, so it wasn't like I never smoked before. Cigarettes were always off the table, but vaping, it was like, it's just kind of cool. I feel cool. I look cool. It makes me feel good. I'll keep doing it, but I never bought one myself. And this continued until I got into my second semester at college in January of 2019. At that point, my friends Juuled so much, I kind of just succumbed to it because I figured, what's the worst that could happen? I mean, I'm just going to get one, I'm going to smoke it here and there, and it'll be all good. And then eventually I'll just quit and I'll stop doing it when I don't want to anymore. Now, at that point, there were still a lot of restrictions, and I don't think a lot of stores had them, or if they did, they weren't selling them as easily. And I know it's college and people are over 21, but at that point, I had no friends over 21. So me and my one buddy actually had to get some guy who, funny enough, is named Mo. He would drive around in his car dropping off vapes to kids at school, which is totally fucked up, honestly, but... So I hit Mo up and I bought 8 pods. I bought 4 mint and 4 mango and a fresh new Juul. And I started using it pretty constantly, and I got addicted in probably like 2 weeks. You know, once you start hitting it properly and really inhaling and getting the effects of the nicotine, because there's 2 ways of smoking. One, you just smoke it and you hold it in your mouth and breathe it out. That's not really going to do anything to you, but you got to pull it into your lungs and do like almost like a second breath or breathe it straight in there. And once that starts happening, that's when you're going to get addicted. That's when it really enters in the system and you get the head highs and you get the really good feeling. I remember for the first couple of times, I would actually smoke it too much and I would get nauseous from nicotine sickness or something along those lines. You know, one would think that would maybe disincentivize me from doing it, but that was not the case. The way I picture of when you're addicted to something is when you really want to stop doing it, but you literally can't. I knew I was addicted when I would hit it, and if I went too long without hitting it, I would get like this urge, this like really strong urge to just smoke. I couldn't fight it. If you've ever had that feeling before, you know what I'm talking about, where it's just this really, really strong urge. That's the only thing you can think about. Even if you don't want to think about it, you just keep thinking about it, and it just doesn't go away until you hit the nicotine. Now, at this point in time, I really wasn't all that worried that I was addicted because I didn't realize I was addicted. I would bring it to class. I would leave class early to go to the bathroom and smoke it in there. I would smoke it around campus. I just felt like I was cool, and I really wasn't, but I felt like I was. I'd walk around, I would hit it, puff my chest up a little bit, get a little strut going. Up until about a week before spring break, it was pretty innocent overall. I would hit it, I would enjoy it, I would laugh about it with my buddies. We would just have a great time. And then I started feeling this sharp pain in my chest. To this day, I still don't really have a great idea what it was, but I was almost certain, especially at that point, it was related to vaping. It was then I realized I had a problem. Because although I was feeling this pain in my chest and it was giving me anxiety, I didn't know if it was I thought it was a punctured lung. I thought it was a lung infection. I thought it was a collapsed lung. It was I was really worried, but I still couldn't stop doing it, even though I wanted to. And that's when I realized, I'm like, oh shit, I might have fucked up. So I was really worried that whole week, and then, kind of went away, and I was like, okay, you know what, that was fine. That was just a phase, nothing crazy. And then the following week during spring break, I actually had a physical with my doctor, and I made a whole video about this last week, but essentially I came back with a really high blood pressure, and he asked if I vaped, and I told him I did. So he told me, don't vape for a couple days or at least a day before, and then we'll take your blood pressure again next week. So we ended up doing that, and my blood pressure was normal when I didn't vape. So after that, it always was stuck in my head that when I vaped, I was basically fucking up my heart and I was going to kill myself later in life because of this whole thing. So that didn't bode well for my mental health, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Even with this newfound knowledge that vaping increased my blood pressure, I still didn't stop because I was addicted. I got back to college after spring break and I kept getting more pods. Eventually, there were no more mango pods, so I had to switch to mint only, which to this day, mint Juul pods were my favorite. And then eventually, though, they even got rid of mint Juul pods because I don't remember the exact reason why, but it was some law that went into effect. Because I remember we did a Secret Santa in 2019, and I gave my best friend mint Juul pods because those were his favorite too, and they were going to be running out after that. So at this point, there were really three options I had. One was to stop vaping in general, which I wish I did, but I didn't. Number two is that I could just start vaping menthol pods or tobacco pods, which I did do menthol pods for a while. Even though I didn't like them at first, I started to develop a taste for them and they became quite enjoyable until those also got banned. And the third option was to start buying disposable vapes. This one ended up lasting the longest and was a big reason why I continued doing it for so long, because these vape flavors were honestly amazing and very scary on how they even managed to create some of these flavors. What was also scary about these vapes were that they all came from China and God knows what the hell were in them. Like, for all the faults that Juul has, at least they were somewhat regulated in what they did. Like, they weren't just going buck wild with all these crazy insane flavors like birthday cake ice and pomegranate or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, they weren't good for you, but they weren't black market shit. So at this point, we're right before when the pandemic started. So let's say February 2020. That's when I really started buying the disposable vapes. I was feeling pretty good at this point, and once the pandemic really started and kicked into place, I essentially didn't leave my house. And at this point, my parents didn't know that I vaped. I couldn't really come up with an excuse to leave for no reason. I couldn't just tell my mom, hey, I'm going to the convenience store to grab some nicotine. I don't think she would have approved of that very well. And also at that point, there were only a couple places where I could even get them at because I wasn't 21 yet. If I went into a place to go buy a vape and they carded me, I would have had to put my head down and basically say, yeah, I left my ID in the car, let me go grab it real quick, and then just leave and never go back. About a month into lockdown, I was getting so bad with it, I ended up stealing a couple of my dad's nicotine pouches. It did help with the urges a tiny little bit, but it wasn't worth it because I got nauseous and almost threw up every time I tried it. So at that point, I was like, fuck it, I'll just wait until I'm able to go out again. That time ended up being about a month later when I was working full time. And once I was back there, I just started buying vapes pretty much every week, I would say. I found those sour apple ice hides that my friend had, and I didn't go back. Ever since then, I started with them and I finished with them. The only other time I didn't smoke those specific vapes were during a 3-month stint during 2021. I was trying to go down to 3% nicotine to help wean myself off of it. From my experience, it didn't really help me. All I ended up doing was vaping more to get more nicotine. My main problem with 3% nicotine was that it didn't really hit the back of the throat enough, as weird as that sounds. The taste was fine, but it wasn't that harshness that I was looking for. So eventually I succumbed since they didn't have the 3%ers the one day, and they was like, oh, we have this 5% one here. And I reluctantly ended up buying it because, well, I needed to, because again, I was addicted hopelessly at that point. And even though I wanted to quit, it's a lot easier said than done. That wasn't the only time I tried to quit. I mean, there were a plethora of other times where I would go a day or two without doing it, and then I would just succumb to it. Something I noticed pretty early on was that every time I tried to quit and failed, I would just end up smoking even more than what I was doing before. Eventually, I was going through one of those hides about every 4 days, I would say, sometimes even faster than that. When originally it was a week, I slowly started doing it more and more and more to get more of that hit. This fact led to two things that really pushed me to quit and kind of gave me the motivation to do so. The first one was I started getting really, really anxious while doing it in like 2021. It was very similar to when in 2019 where I had like that pain in my lungs and the whole blood pressure thing with the doctor. I ended up worrying about having a heart attack. Again, that's in that same video I already made, so I'm not going to go too much into it here. But essentially, I was getting like these weird like little muscle spasms or twitches, and it would make me think I was having like a heart attack. It would just give me general anxiety, and it was affecting my whole life. I started getting really out of shape, just kind of scared to do anything. It fucked my mental health up real bad. The other thing this really drove home was just how addicted I was to it, because I really wanted to quit at this point to try to stop this anxiety and hopefully it would help me. I couldn't do it no matter how hard I tried. I still vaped through the whole entire anxiety attack, and it didn't really limit how much I did it. Here and there, I would maybe take an hour break, which at the time seemed like a lot, but I just couldn't stop. So this was certainly a motivating factor, but it really wasn't the end-all be-all factor. What really pushed me to quit, and it was sort of just a random thought at the time, but I was kind of just generally depressed and I didn't really want to do anything with my life or do anything. The question that came to me was, why wasn't I enjoying anything? I was watching YouTube that night and I was just like numb. The answer I ended up coming up with was that vaping was killing my dopamine receptors. Being constantly bombarded with a shit ton of dopamine from the nicotine, I think it was frying my brain into a state where if I wasn't vaping constantly and getting more and more nicotine to me, I was going to lose a lot of enjoyment for a lot of things in life. And I might have been over exaggerating this, I probably was, but it ended up pushing me to quit, so I'm not really upset with myself for having that thought. A couple days later, this thought really drove me home to try and fully quit for good. I threw my main vape away after that, and I had a lot of dead vapes in my drawers, so I also threw them away. The reason why I had those was if you keep them long enough, sometimes they'll give you an extra hit. So if I ever ran out of nicotine, I would cycle through trying to hit like 15 of them and trying just to suck it and see if it would flash and if it would give me any nicotine. It was so sad to see. And after that, I really just stayed true to myself and didn't buy any more vapes because that was my biggest problem. If I didn't have a vape, I couldn't vape. And that was my theory. And the main reason why I was able to vape all the time was that I was buying a vape. So if I didn't buy a vape, I wouldn't be able to do it. And I know there's like a theory where if you don't vape for a couple days, the urges go away. And that is true. But there's a lot of other factors that go into it. One of the hardest problems for me was when I was going to the bathroom. Whenever I went to the bathroom, I would always hold my dick in one hand and I would vape in the other hand. So after I stopped vaping, I would go to the bathroom really urging to have a vape because I would have my dick in one hand and I would have nothing to do with the other hand. And it was a nostalgic feeling where it just reminded me of doing it, and that was really tough mentally. I was absolutely miserable when I first quit though. It took me, I don't even know, a couple weeks to get back to somewhat normal. I ended up just drinking a lot of coffee to try to stimulate that rough hit in the throat whenever I wanted to smoke. Or I would chew a lot of gum, which to this day I still have that habit. I chew a lot of gum. Now, that certainly helps, and I was getting like some toothpicks to try to subsidize doing something with my mouth. You know, I bite my nails, that kind of helped a little bit. What really helped me was when I got home from work, I was so tired, I just fell asleep through the whole night for like 12 hours. And because I was asleep for 12 straight hours pretty much, I couldn't think about vaping. Because if I was stuck at home thinking about it for about 4 hours before I went to bed, then I would have such a strong urge to drive out to the convenience store and buy some more vapes. So I couldn't do that. And if I was at work, I obviously couldn't buy more. And eventually, over a couple weeks of doing this, I ended up getting a better sleep schedule. I started not thinking about it as much. And again, if you're addicted and have tried to quit something, you know the feeling I'm talking about. I can't really describe it. Admittedly, I don't really remember it anymore because it's been so long at this point. But it's a tough thing to do. And I really empathize with a lot of like drug users and a lot of other people trying to quit smoking in general. It really opened my eyes on how hard it is to do something like this. I was going to give some advice to those who are trying to quit, but honestly, I feel kind of slimy doing that. You know, I don't want it to come off like I'm trying to rub it in your face that I was able to quit and you're not able to quit, because it's one of those things where it's really up to the individual to do it. If you aren't motivated and you don't want to stop, then it's just not going to happen. The only real advice I'll give to someone is if they've never vaped before, and that advice would just be never ever buy a vape. Once you buy one and it starts to become a ritual when you do it, when you first wake up, right before you go to bed, you do it while you're jerking off, while you're going to the bathroom, while you're doing anything really, it becomes extremely hard to stop. Everybody's journey to quitting is different. Some people like to try to lean themselves off with Zins or patches or nicotine gum, Nicorette, and everybody has their own journey in quitting. Some people have surgery and then they stop after that because they have no means of access to it. Once you're already hooked on the line, there's really not much any advice is going to do for you other than if you want to quit, you just have to do it. There's no easy solutions. It's up to the individual. If you don't have any intrinsic motivation to stop doing it, then it's not going to happen. That may not be what you want to hear, but it's going to be a tough journey. It really is. This is why I really only like to give advice to people who've never vaped before, never had nicotine before, since obviously they have no idea what it's like. I can't sit here and say there's no benefits to nicotine because there certainly are some, like it'll help manage your stress or it'll increase your concentration in working. But for me, I think the cons outweigh the positives. And a really big factor too is just that there's no long-term studies on this shit yet. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 20 years? I mean, myself included, we're all guinea pigs, whoever vape. No one has any idea what the long-term effects are. So that's another thing to consider. I know I said I wouldn't give any advice to those who are trying to quit, but I will leave you with this little nugget at least, is just don't give up and keep trying new things. You never know what's going to work. My one friend quit through drinking a lot of water whenever he wanted to hit. Or my other friend was actually the one who went under surgery. That one's a little more unrealistic. I had another buddy who tried quitting by going on Zins. That didn't really work, so he's still in that fight right now because he ended up going back to vaping after a breakup. No two journeys quitting vaping is going to be the same. As soon as you have the thoughts of, well, I've tried 4 times to quit vaping, it's going to be too hard or I can't do it, then it's just not going to happen. Vaping is binary. It's one of those things where you either do it or you don't do it. It's really that simple. That might be a blunt way of putting it, but it's one of those things where if you really want to stop, you can't make excuses. It's that simple. Sorry to burst any bubbles out there, but, it's going to be a tough journey. It really is. I'm going to end it now, though, because if I keep going, I'm just going to ramble on and on and on about a bunch of bullshit, and I think I got my point across at this point on my story. So I thank you for listening if you did, and I invite you to comment if you have any addictions or any things that you are trying to quit or have quit. I would actually really enjoy reading them. So with that, thank you, and have a good day.